Turn my video on. Hello, everybody. I'm Charles Werner. I'm the Director of Drone Responders. And welcome to the first conversation on public safety UAS with Michael O'Shea in the FAA. So this is the first in our series. Once every month, the second Wednesday at 4 p.m., we will have a conversation with Mike O'Shea and or whomever he brings as guest for future topics that we have. So we might be talking next time, as we were originally going to do today, we were going to be talking about SGIs and that whole process until the rules came out. So the next one might be SGIs, might include Kerry Fleming, might include some others who come in to speak. So we're excited about that. So it's 4 p.m. Eastern time every second Wednesday. And of course, I want to make sure I give thanks to DJI and Skydio for their support of drone responders in general for these webcasts and Drone Responders podcast series. And a quick information, a little bit about drone responders. We are the leading and award-winning nonprofit program under the Airborne International Response Team, AIRT. We have resource centers online and various working groups. And to get access to all that and to participate, you just need to join, and it's droneresponders.org, and membership is free. And with all of that, let me get down to introducing our host of today's session. That will be Mike O'Shea, Program Manager with the FAA UAS Integration Office. And Mike, take it away.
Yeah, my name is Mike O'Shea, and if I haven't met you before, I'll give you a little background on myself. I just hit 3 years at the FAA. Prior to coming to the FAA, I spent 17 years with the Department of Justice, where I was a senior law enforcement program manager, managing national law enforcement programs like body armor, aviation technologies, and some other programs. Prior to that, I spent 2 years teaching at the State of Maryland Law Enforcement Academy. And prior to that, I spent 15 years as a uniformed law enforcement officer in Kansas. The idea of these conversations is to give you guys the opportunity to have the FAA come in, and you don't have to always listen to Mike O'Shea, and you probably don't always want to listen to Mike O'Shea, but I can bring in people that you have an interest that you want to talk to from the FAA that you have specific questions about. Whether you want to ask about, getting a special governmental interest, SGI, from the Systems Operations Support Center, whether you want to talk to the waivers team about, waivers for specific types of operations, or you want to talk about the big waiver, the 91113, the see and avoid flying beyond visual line of sight waiver, see what are some of the requirements for that. Charles asked me today to talk to you a little bit about some of the new rules that came out. We had 3 new rules come out. One is remote ID. The second one is operations over people. And the third rule is night operations. And I think as a public safety agency, I think you're going to like these rules. And I'm not going to bore you to death with a PowerPoint presentation and tell you. I'm just going to give you some background information on the rules. And if you have additional questions, I ask that you follow up with me or ask as part of this at the end of this presentation. I might not have all the answers. I can tell you, if you know me already, I don't have all the answers, but I know the people who do. So I'm happy to reach out to people and get additional information if you need it or it's required. I'm certainly happy to work with you to get the answers to your question. And I always joke with Charles. Sorry, Charles.
Well, I just want to say, if you have questions, do it in the chat, and we'll catch yours at the end, and we'll see if we can cover it. We have 90 minutes. Not that we'll need 90 minutes necessarily. We'll use what we need, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. So let's first talk about the remote identification rule. And this has been a long time in the making. In fact, I actually sat on the aviation rulemaking or ARC for this when I was still at the Department of Justice. And basically, this rule came about because our national security partners, our law enforcement partners said, we need the ability to, if we see a drone in the sky, to ID that drone. If it's doing something illegal, we can make contact with the operator and deal with it accordingly. And we also know with the advent of drones, we're going to start having a lot more kind of nuisance calls. And we wanted the ability for the general public to look at a drone and get some information from that drone that they could pass on to public safety who are responding to these nuisance calls, whether they're flying, looking at their daughter sunbathing in the backyard, or peeping Tom folks, or just they think they're causing some kind of issue, to give the ability to reach out and to talk to somebody. So the first question we've been getting is I think the most frantic question we've been getting is people are like, oh my God, you have a new rule. What do I got to do today or tomorrow or next week? And the answer is right now, you don't have to do anything. The new rule doesn't actually take effect until it's published in the Federal Registry. And we think that might be Friday, but it could be sometime next week. we published the rule on December 28th, or we sent it over to the Federal Registry on December 28th, but it doesn't become official until it's actually published in the Federal Registry. And it takes time for them to take that information, to format it, to review it, to put it in the system, and then to put it online. So we're hoping that'll be this Friday, but if not, it'll be sometime next week, we hope. And then what happens is once that rule takes effect, once it's been published, the rule does not take effect until 60 days after that. So there's 60-day, it's a comment period for 60 days that allows people to comment on the specific rules before they go in, they're enacted 60 days after the publication. And so the thing that people keep telling me is, well, do I have to be ready to do something in 60 days? And the answer is no. If you're a public safety agency, your operating compliance date is 30 months after the effective date of that rule. So basically 30 days or 60 days after the publication plus 30 months is when you have to be worried about how you comply with the rule. And that's not until 2023. And just sort of give you some of the deadlines right now is once the rule's published, our first thing that we have to do is in 45 days, we have to put online a new training, recurrency training that includes night operations, both for Part 107 operators and Part 61 operators that are operating under 107 by using their Part 61 to get Part 107. That's people who are manned aviation pilots that were able to take the test online without having to go to a testing center. But so in the future, from now on, your recurrency testing will be free. You'll do it online with the FAA. You'll still have to, if you've never got your Part 107 license, you'll still have to do the initial testing with a testing center and pay whatever that cost is, $160 or whatever they're charging for that. If you're a Part 61 pilot, it's still free to take it online. Which is kind of nice because you don't have to pay for it anymore. It's nice for Part 61 pilots too, because it used to be that if you were a Part 61 pilot, you had to have currency in manned aircraft. In other words, you had to have your basic flight review as current in your manned aircraft in order to exercise the privileges of Part 107. Well, that's no longer required. As long as you keep taking the test, a recurrency test, you'll be able to exercise the privileges of Part 107, whether you're current in manned aircraft or not. However, I'm not telling my wife that because she usually writes the check for my recurrency testing, and I want to fly. So if you have the same issue as I won't tell your spouse that that you no longer have to be current. So even though that testing is online in 45 days, you cannot exercise that privilege until 60 days when the rule actually comes into effect. So we're giving you essentially 15 days to prepare for the rule coming into play. But again, you cannot exercise the privilege until after that rule takes effect. The other thing is you should know is if you currently are a Part 107 operator and you have a night waiver, that night waiver will sunset 120 days after this rule coming into effect. So eventually you're going to have to go into the system and take this online training so that you continue to operate at night. So we basically want you to operate at night based on this FAA training, but you have 120 days to accomplish that after the rule becomes in effect. The other dates you probably you don't really need to know about, but we'll tell you is that the UAS manufacturing and production compliance date is 60 days plus 18 months after the rule takes effect. The FRIA, or the FAA restricted identification areas, the applications for those to become one of those is 20 months after the effective date of the rule. So basically, we're looking at 2022 for the manufacturers and the FRIAs, and for the operator compliance date, it will be sometime in 2023. So with remote ID, there's actually 3 ways you comply. The first one, and probably the main way that public safety will comply, is through the standard remote ID process. And essentially what that is it gives you the ability, I lost my phone here, to take some kind of device that can pick up either Wi-Fi or Bluetooth signals, and that my iPhone can do that, and it did it very effectively when we did the demo of this. And the cool thing is, this doesn't have to be connected to cellular, neither does the drone, and it doesn't have to be connected to the internet or the drone. It just broadcasts live, and you have a built-in function in your phone, whether it's Apple or whatever manufacturer, Samsung or whoever, that gives you the ability to receive Bluetooth and Wi-Fi signals. So you'll be able, as a public safety agency, when you see a drone fly overhead, You'll ID that drone. You'll hold up your phone and it'll say that drone is ABC 123 and it belongs to Mike O'Shea. And oh, by the way, whoever's holding the controllers is over at 5th and Main. So the information it'll give you, it'll have to operate from takeoff to shutdown. It'll give you the drone ID, not the registration number, but the serial number of the drone. It'll give you the drone location and altitude. It'll give you the drone velocity. It'll give you where the control station location is and its elevation. It'll give you what we call a time marker, the current time that it's operating at. And it'll also advise you if there's any emergency status with that drone. So if it's got it's lost contact, it's getting radio frequency interference or whatever that's happening with that drone, a low battery, it can send you that signal as well too. So the question I always get is, I've gotten so far, is that, so I can see all this information, including where the operator's at, well, what about the public? Well, the public, when they hold up their device that picks up either the Wi-Fi broadcast or Bluetooth broadcast, all they're going to get is the serial number of that drone. That's it, nothing more. You'll get more information as a public safety agency, but the average citizen will just get the serial number. And then the next question we obviously get is, well, if my serial number is ABC123, if I'm a police agency and I don't want people to know that it's me every time I'm operating, they're going to know it's me if it's ABC123 is my serial number. Every time they see that up, they'll know, the cops are in the air. And the answer to that is we're building a system called Session ID. And Session ID is the ability for you to have a randomly generated number every time you fly. So every time you fly, it'll be a different randomly assigned number. However, public safety will have the ability to interrogate that aircraft and know, that ABC 123 is the Acme Police Department or Acme Fire Department or whoever. They'll have the ability to decode that number. So we've also had the questions about, do we have the ability to strangle the RID squawk? And the answer is there isn't the ability to petition the administrator to do that, but we are not encouraging that. We're wanting you to if you're concerned about your operations and you don't want public to know about your operations, we want you to use the session ID. You're probably going to run into more issues if you're up flying and someone holds up a phone and sees no ID. They're going to know that something's either bad happening because it's a bad operator, or it's the police department strangling their RID squawk. The second way you can operate is with what we call a remote ID broadcast module. And the remote ID broadcast module is simply a dongle or a device that you attach to your drone, and it's going to give you the drone ID, the drone location and altitude, the drone velocity, the takeoff location and elevation, and the time marker, the current time that the drone is operating. The difference is this is to be used basically line of sight operations. Obviously, if the operator moves with the controls, it's not going to know that because it's just a device that's on that drone. It knows where the drone took off. But if the operator moves, it's not going to follow the operator. It's not rebroadcasting where the control sticks are at. So that's the information you're going to get from that. So it's a limited operation. And we've had some people concerned about, well, what is it going to cost if my manufacturer doesn't give me a firmware update that makes my drone compliant with the remote ID rule? What does it cost for one of these devices, these broadcast remote ID devices? And the answer is we did an economic study of this, and the FAA estimated to be about $50. However, we've already seen people building these things in Europe, and the prices have been about $25. So I'm sure as people start building these devices, the costs will get cheaper and cheaper, hopefully, as time goes by. We did talk to some of the larger drone manufacturers and asked them if they had the ability to download firmware that would make their drones compliant. And I know that one of them was DJI, and DJI, who represents about 90% of the public safety market. And they said they will have the ability to download firmware to make the drone remote ID compliant under the standard remote ID process, but only for the drones they currently support. So my little DJI Spark, I doubt they're going to provide me, going to go to work to download firmware for that because they don't sell it even anymore. But if you have a current unit that they support, you can probably expect them to provide a download for you to make you compliant with remote ID. The last way you can fly under remote ID is what we call a FAA recognized identification area, or a FRIA. And basically that's a place where you can operate without having to do remote ID or broadcasting. But without remote ID, you must operate within visual line of sight within the FRIA. Anyone can fly there, but the FRIAs can only be done or requested by community-based organizations or educational institutions. Basically, it's either colleges or universities or high schools that are creating a specific area that people can operate and test them and play with drones recreationally or educationally, but not having to have a remote ID because they're staying in sort of a fixed area that we've recognized that, hey, people are going to be flying drones here and they're not going to have remote ID. If you leave that area, you are going to have a broadcast module, or you're going to have or be compliant with the standard remote ID process. The another thing that came out of this new rule is in the past, if you came across an operator who was operating a drone, by law, you could demand to see their registration. You could demand to see their waiver or authorization if they were flying under that. But while you could ask for the remote pilot certificate, by law, they were not required to provide it. And it was just sort of something that somebody had missed in the writing of the 107 rule. And so under the new rules, they will be required to provide the remote pilot certificate in order to conduct operations. And they provide that to either the FAA or our law enforcement. So that's something that's new that will be changing. I'm trying to think of some other things that you probably want to know. So I actually think the rule's pretty good. I will tell you that we tested the remote ID systems just to make sure they worked, to see if they were user friendly. And this was pre-production stuff, and it worked flawlessly. I was really surprised. And we also saw some unique capabilities that I think remote ID will add. One is we saw a company that provided essentially like a little box about the size of a cell phone that had an antenna on it that you could mount several of these around a facility to give you information about whether or not drones are flying towards you. So if you're concerned about your prison, your firehouse, your city buildings, your police station, you have the ability to put these devices on. And at DOJ, we used to call it knowing what you don't know. So you'd know if people keep approaching. Why does Mike O'Shea keep flying towards my fire station? Why does Mike O'Shea keep flying to all my fire stations around the city? Why is he doing this? Is he interested in just taking pictures of firehouses? Or is there some nefarious reason that he's doing this? So there's a lot of cool capabilities I think you're going to be able to get out of remote ID to provide some protection systems as well, besides having the ability to use some kind of a handheld device to look at to see a drone and ID the drone. So the other rules that came out, and I know you're going to have lots of questions about remote ID. It's probably the most interesting and semi-complex. Not as complex as operations over people, at least for me, because I'm not math smart. But there's a lot of cool stuff I think for public safety out of remote ID, and I've heard a lot of people say a lot of things that weren't true. They're a little misinformed about what the rule does, but I think it really, we listened to the comments, and I don't know if you know, we got 55,000 comments, which was the largest number of comments we ever got for rulemaking. And Mike O'Shea got the public safety ones, and that was about 1,700 comments. And I heard someone say, well, they didn't read all those. And I guarantee you, we read every single one, because I had to read them and I had to put them in categories, and we had to respond to them. And some of those responses we got were, hey, what if we don't have Wi-Fi? What if, we don't have cellular connection because we're doing operations in the mountains or the deserts or someplace like that? And that's the reason we don't have we don't require that you're connected to the internet or they're connected to cellular technology. There was also concern that if we did sort of session recordings by sending the information or by recording the information be sent to a universal service supplier or USS, that there would be a cost involved and people didn't want to pay that. So that's not part of this rule anymore. There's no recording of these broadcasts. It's up to you to sort of to figure out who's flying, what they're doing, and deal with it accordingly. So operations over people. The main thing I want to tell you about operations over people is the questions we're typically getting right now is we've had people say, hey, I have a drone that weighs less than 0.55 pounds, so I can go ahead and fly over people. Is that correct? Well, we did break up operations over people into sort of 4 categories. And the first category is for operations that category 1 is operations of 0.55 pounds or less. But there's a rule in there. It says it does not contain any exposed rotating parts that could lacerate human skin upon impact with a human being. So if you add prop guards to your DJI Mavic Mini and it puts it over 0.55 pounds, it's no longer in this category. And then I had someone tell me, he goes, well, I've stuck my finger in the props of, my DJI Mavic Mini, it didn't cut my finger. And so, all I can say to you is if you were flying that thing at full speed and you hit a baby with their soft skin and it didn't lacerate the baby, then, maybe you can make that case, but I don't really think you can. I think you need to think about putting prop guards or some kind of shrouds on your props in order to meet this requirement. And, what do I know? Maybe somebody will come up with some extremely lightweight that doesn't put the drone over 0.55 pounds, but I don't know that. And I'm sure that there'll probably be some manufacturers in the future that'll look for ways to make their drones even lighter with shrouded props that'll meet this category to give you the ability to fly over people. And basically the rule says that it does include everything that's on board or otherwise attached to the aircraft at the time of takeoff and throughout the duration of each operation. And again, like I said, and you'll hear this through all these, it does not contain any exposed rotating parts that could lacerate human skin upon impact with a human being. Category 2 is where you start doing math. It talks about foot-pounds of kinetic energy. And basically it says, category 2, you can have up to 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. And that's based on the weight of the aircraft, the speed of the aircraft, and what it does hitting a fixed object. And again, the small aircraft, unmanned aircraft may not contain any exposed rotating parts that could lacerate human skin. A small UAS will only be eligible under category 2 operations if the person submitting the declaration of compliance, the applicant, can demonstrate that the injury resulting from an impact between the small unmanned aircraft and a person on the ground is less than the injury severity limit, which is that 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. So, it's not something that we expect you as the operator to probably deal with. We're looking for the manufacturers to work these engineering issues and make a declaration as to whether or not they meet the standards. Or right now we're looking at minimum standards, but we're actually working with some of the standard bodies to develop some long-term standards for people to be compliant with these rules. So category 3 is much like category 2, except now it's 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, and that there's some additional requirements since it's a bigger aircraft and more likely to cause harm. Operations are prohibited over open-air assemblies of human beings and only permitted if the operation is within or over closed or restricted access sites and everyone within that site has been notified that a small unmanned aircraft may fly over them. So if you have, your stadium event, you make part of your ticket that, hey, be advised, we're probably going to fly a drone overhead to take pictures or to do whatever. That's what you're going to have to do. And also that the other rule is that the small unmanned aircraft does not maintain sustained flight over a person not directly participating in the operation or located under a covered structure or inside a stationary vehicle that can provide a reasonable protection from a falling small unmanned aircraft. And again, you're going to hear this over and over, not contain any exposed rotating parts that could lacerate human skin upon impact with a human being. So prop guards, I know I have a set of prop guards someplace for my DJI Spark. I'm going to have to find out where they're at because they're going to be sort of a requirement under any of these rules. So get used to flying with your prop guards on again if you want to fly over people. The last category for operations over people, or category 4, is if you take your aircraft through a certification process to certify the aircraft and a production certificate to go through the aircraft. It'll be assumed that if it meets the production, if it's a certified aircraft, that it'll be allowed to fly over people so long as the operating limitations specified in the approved flight manual do not prohibit operations over human beings. So as long as the manufacturer who takes this through the certification process doesn't put in the flight manual that, hey, you cannot fly this over people, then you will be allowed to fly over people. There are a lot of charts already out about, looking at kinetic energy, is basically the energy of an object possesses due to its motion. And obviously, the greatest amount of impact of a falling object is when it actually just before it hits. But it talks about it in terms of, kinetic energy is dealing with mass and velocity, which is a little above Mike O'Shea's engineering and scientific knowledge. But I can certainly send you some of the basic charts that they've come up with if you're interested. But really, like I said, while you have the right as an individual owner of a drone to take it to make a declaration of compliance and shows that you meet the compliance, we're really sort of looking at the manufacturers to do this, except for the drones that are less than 0.55 pounds. The last, and I don't want to get really into the declaration of compliance, but there's going to be a standard process for how we do that. And like I said, we're working with the standard bodies to sort of develop what it looks like and what it means in terms of injury severity to people on the ground should that drone fall out of that aircraft fall out of the air. We also added sort of a category of operations over people to talk about operations over moving vehicles. And the rule does allow small unmanned aircraft operations over people inside moving vehicles subject to the following specific conditions. The small unmanned aircraft must either meet the requirements for category 1, 2, 3, or 4 under the new subpart D of part 107. If not, or part 4, if it's not prohibited from the operating limitations in the flight manual. And for categories 1, 2, and 3, the operation must meet one of the following conditions. The small unmanned aircraft must be within or access site where any human being located inside a moving vehicle within the closed or restricted access site is on notice that a small unmanned aircraft may fly over them. Or 2, if the operation is not within or over a closed or restricted access site, the small unmanned aircraft must not maintain sustained flight over a moving vehicle. So in other words, it's going to be okay to cross roadways, but it's not going to be okay to stay on top of a vehicle and right on top of it and follow that vehicle unless it's in a restricted access site and the people in that vehicle are aware that a drone is overhead and following them. And the last part of the rule is the night operations. And I think we already sort of talked about it a little bit, but remote pilots in command who wish to conduct small unmanned aircraft operations at night must complete either the updated initial test or the updated recurrent online training prior to conducting such operations. Right now, if you currently have a night waiver under Part 107, like I said, you'll be able to exercise that privilege for 120 days after the rule takes effect. So essentially 60 days plus 120 days. And then that will sunset and you'll need to have taken the training in order to conduct night operations. Prior to conducting small unmanned aircraft operations at night, the small unmanned aircraft must be equipped with anti-collision lights that can be seen from 3 statute miles and have a flash rate sufficient to avoid a collision. And these, obviously, when you take off, you have to ensure that these anti-collision lights are on and working and effective and operational. And then, like I said, you do have the 120 days that you can operate after the rule takes effect, 60 days from when it's published, to continue to operate in your current waiver, but you cannot, after that, you'll have to take the test. And then, obviously, like I said before, we will have the testing online, or we're supposed to have the testing online 45 days from the effective date of the rule. And you can start taking the test online at that point, but you cannot not exercise the privileges until the rule actually takes effect, which is 60 days from the publication of the rule.
And that's free.
And it's free. It's like drone responders. It costs, actually it does cost because you pay taxes. So your tax dollars paid for it, but you don't have to pay any additional funding to take those tests. I know we made a lot of people happy with that have from large agencies like Texas DPS, Customs Border Protection, FBI, who have a lot of operators. And it was actually costing a lot of money to do this recurrent testing. So the initial test, you'll have to go to a test center to take your Part 107 test. But after that, your recurrent testing will be done online with the FAA and will not cost additional fees or funding or whatever. So that's the 3 new rules. We're pretty excited by them. There's some still things that have to be worked out. We're sort of glad we have 30 months to work some of the issues out, like how do we only let law enforcement have a device that can see, where the drone operator is at and not let the general public have that device? How do we determine who is a law enforcement agency and who's not a law enforcement agency? So those issues are currently being worked out through our next generation office. They've got that task and are working it right now. But there are some things that we still need to resolve. The session IDs. And then we've had tons of questions from people about this. Can I incorporate this information into, my own law enforcement intelligence system? And the answer is yes, you can. We're not doing it for you, but you certainly can. And then the people that come up with the apps or whatever the devices that'll let you, look at that drone in the sky and get that information, they can certainly provide just hung up on my wife there. The manufacturers of these apps and stuff can create interfaces that can do a lot more than we initially, saw when we did our demonstration of the project. So it really depends on what the customers want. We're not gonna build it. We're gonna let the industry build the apps. We're gonna let them build design the firmware, and we're gonna let them build the broadcast modules as long as they meet the scientific requirements and engineering requirements that we provided in the rule.
So essentially, the apps that were developed could capture that information and save it within the app, so you could go back and look at it later if you wanted, and a whole bunch of other things.
It can do whatever you want to pay them to do.
Yeah.
But it's not an FAA thing.
So it looks to me like I've got about 48 questions.
I can only do 41.
Okay, well, let's go through and see what we can cover here. Let me get back to where I was. Okay, the first question is, can you explain again the timing of the rule that goes in effect and how and what requirement is for the individual departments to have this capability on their aircraft?
Sure, and that's a good question, and I'm looking at the chart and it's I have to keep looking at the chart because I get confused myself, so I completely understand the question. So the rule was published. We sent the rule over for publication on December 28th, and so nothing starts until the rule is actually published in the Federal Register. And we're, like I said, we're hoping that it's this Friday. We've been hinted at that it was this Friday. We asked for emergency publication because typically it takes 1 to 2 months for things to get published. So we asked for emergency review to publish it quicker. So we've been told maybe this Friday, maybe next week. We're not sure. Excuse me. But so it doesn't start until 60 days after it's published in the Federal Registry. So that means as a public safety agency, your operating compliance date, the date you need to be compliant with the rule, is sometime in 2023. It's the effective date, 60 days from Friday or whenever, plus 30 months. So you have a lot of time to become compliant with this. And it's also to give some time for the manufacturers to do stuff like download firmware, write firmware, the software for that firmware, and also for people to develop those broadcast modules. So you're not under the gun yet, but it's coming.
Okay, the next question is, pilots who have expired Part 107 licenses, will they be required to take the recurrent test before they can proceed with the new ongoing training by the FAA?
So we actually, I wasn't sure about this answer. We had this question earlier today on the Airborne Public Safety Association drone call. And the answer is, and I got this from Flight Standards, is that no, as long as you own, you possess the remote pilot certificate, then you can take the online recurrent testing. Somewhere I have my remote pilot UAS. You can, as long as you have this, you can do the recurrent testing online. If you don't have that, then you're going to go to a test center and take the initial test.
And the other important fact was, and if it has expired and you want to fly, how does that affect you as far as going forward?
So if it's expired now and you're waiting, you have two options. And I know several people said, well, and this was a complaint we sort of had from some folks that said, well, I just paid $160 to take the recurrent test, the recurrent test. Why do I have to, why did I have to do that? Can I get refunded? And the answer is no, because we don't run the testing centers. We just contract with them. But there were always going to be people who would sort of fall in that category where they would be, between the rule and their recurrent testing, that there's not much we could really do for that. But if you're currently expired and you want to fly now prior to the implementation of the rule, then you're gonna have to go pay the $160 or whatever it costs to take the recurrent test. Sorry. Or you wait.
So the next one is another question I think you already answered. What is the cutoff for pilots whose Part 107 license will expire soon? If you're before the rule and you want to fly, you got to take the test at a center. If you can wait until the new rule comes out, you can do it by the time periods as you've just explained. The next one is pilots who currently hold Part 107 license but do not hold a daytime waiver under the new rule. Will they be issued the waiver or will they still need to apply for it?
So we're going to stop issuing waivers for daytime night operations. When you take if you want to operate at night, you have to take the online training, which is also the recurrent training. So that will make you current, even if you just were current, but it'll also give you the ability to operate at night. If you just took your, if you just did your recurrent training or testing and it's good for 2 years and you don't have a night waiver and you don't want a night waiver, you're good for 2 years. But if you want the night waiver, you're going to have to go into the FAA site, and when we publish that online in 45 days after the publication of the rule, and then take that training online in order to operate at night.
And just to reemphasize, those that have night waivers currently have 120-day sunset after the rule takes effect.
Yep. So 120 plus 60 days after the rule is published in the Federal Registry.
The next one is, what is the deadline to have remote ID on all aircraft? You answered that, but in our current fleet, will there be any exceptions?
No.
Okay, that was quick. Where can we find vendors who offer remote ID that is approved by the FAA?
So right now there's nobody that's approved or that I know of. I mean, we did demonstrate some stuff. In fact, DJI provided us we were able to download with to a Mavic Enterprise that we got from Alameda County Sheriff's Department. They allowed us to download software to make it remote ID compliant. So I think a lot of the manufacturers of the normal manufacturers you typically work with, hopefully will do firmware downloads, but when they do that, that's based on them. If they do that, it's based on them. But if they manufacture drones after that date, which is 18 months plus the effective date, their drones after that date will have to have the remote broadcast ID capability built into them.
So this question says, is there a recurrent exam? I think we've already answered that. There is. And is there also online training for that recurrent exam?
So the recurrent exam is a training module essentially, and I haven't seen it, so I can't really talk to how it's laid out and stuff. But but if you haven't, I'm not sure. So do me a favor, email me on that question, and I'll send it over to the flight standards or the testing folks to see what they're putting up there. But my understanding is it's supposed to be something that if you already have the basic knowledge that you got from taking your 107 test through a testing center, it's going to be sort of a training module that provides information about night operations and other operations and how to operate safely in the national airspace. And I don't want to say it's supposed to be easy, but it's supposed to be logical. But we are the federal government, so we'll see how that goes. But I don't know because I haven't seen the test yet.
We're really saying that this is going to be logical from the FAA? Is that what you're saying?
I know it's scary for me to say from the federal government that something's going to be illogical, but it's supposed to be that way. We had, like I said, we had 55,000 comments, and a lot of people demanded specific things, and I have to tell you, and maybe the FAA's brainwashed me, but I think we did a really good job of sort of responding to those comments and developing these rules.
Yeah, you had a tough. I mean, over 50,000 comments. That's a lot of comments to try to satisfy. One here comes about the remote ID being able to locate the controller. And the concern was raised about anybody being able to get that. You've explained law enforcement gets that, others don't. I guess the other question comes out that's come down lower is it law enforcement or can public safety get access? Because a lot of times public safety is operating in the area and they're the ones that need to know and law enforcement's not there. So
my understanding is we talked about this in some of the meetings about, because I know like fire services want to know if someone's flying a drone, wildfire areas and some other stuff. So I think you're going to see some broader authorizations for those types of missions. One of the issues that we had, or one of the yellow risks we got with this rule, is there were concerns from people from public safety. So if I'm operating my drone, I'm conducting a legal operation, I'm with the Acme drone company, and I'm flying for the Acme real estate agency to take pictures of a house that's for sale. Now that the public safety can ID where the operator's at, what's to prevent public safety from coming over and hassling us? Or for the media, what's to prevent public safety from hassling us? So one of the things we're trying to do right now is develop a video training course. We're doing this in conjunction with the Alameda County Sheriff's Department, that basically talks about the best way to approach a drone operator if you have specific questions, and also some tips for drone operators to make sure the police don't get called on them. So, you don't get called about a suspicious drone operation. If I'm flying for, the Acme drone company and I'm filming, for the Acme real estate company, it would probably behoove me to make some like door flyers that say, hey, just so you know, the Acme drone company will be flying for the Acme real estate company tomorrow at this house, because your neighbor's selling, blah, blah, blah. And here's my information. And here's the Acme real estate information. And one, that'll let people know what you're doing and prevent the police from getting called as suspicious, aircraft. But two, it sort of sells your business too, because you just, if that person living in that house says, hey, if I need to get my house filmed, I know who to call. So it's good for both players. And we've also talked about some other things and I know that my wife makes fun of the yellow safety vests, but I think they're really a great idea, that says, you're a UAS operator. It shows that you're doing some kind of professional operation. If I was a police officer and I showed up a scene and somebody had that on, I realize it's not some, guy flying careless or clueless or criminally, probably. And the other thing we've advised them to do is sort of, create a sheet that has information about who you are, your drone license, the registration of your aircraft, what the operation is, your information, the Acme real estate information, and make lots of copies of that and just stick it on your drone box, your transportation box. So when the cops show up and they're wondering what you do, you can kind of point into that and say, hey, I'm almost finished. Is it okay if I go ahead and land? And they have the information they need. And as public safety, we need to have the ability to sort of walk up to people carefully, so not to interfere with the safety of that flight, and basically say, hey, I'm the Mike O'Shea from the Shawnee County Sheriff's Department. We got a call for reference to someone, a suspicious person's flying a drone. When can you please land the drone so we can, talk about your operation? And then you should basically be quiet to let that guy, conduct that flight operation, land the drone, and then you can make contact with them to figure out what they were doing.
Okay, so this question is about, it says, I have an existing night and over people waiver under my 107 currently. It's due to renew next month. How do I renew, or will there not be any renewals until?
I doubt, they have the ability to continue to renewals until the rule actually takes effect. But I think you're going to see them, both the ATO and flight standards pushing people towards the new rule, unless you need to immediately have the capability to both operate at night and operations over people. I know we had an issue with an agency that was having some kind of a festival, Christmas festival or whatever in early January, that did not have a night waiver and would not get it in time. And we were able to arrange for them, because of the safety of the crowd, to get an SGI waiver for them to operate at night. So there are some ways around that if you really need to operate at night, or you can still go through the standard system, but they're going to try to tell you, if you don't have to have it right now, wait for the rule, because it's going to make your life a lot more easier.
Okay, and then I have one. It says,
hold on 1 second. Somebody has a waiver for operations over people?
Yeah, night and over.
Good for you. That's not an easy waiver to get, so good for you.
Well, this person is an exceptional person, so let me just say that. The next question I have is, will the nighttime training meet the requirement for a night trained visual observer?
I don't know that answer, but I will find out.
And
And
that's
the
what it
issue
says.
right now is we currently don't issue a specific waiver for the observer. So, I mean, my guess is you'll still be able to conduct your own training with that observer, and I would certainly document any training you give that observer. But let me find out if there's something specifically in the training that covers night operations for a visual observer.
Okay. Um, will the
Good question.
Will the private sector be able to have the same software to identify drone IDs?
No, it'll be different. It'll be, so public safety will get the ability, the average citizen, and that includes the private industry, will have the ability to basically only see the drone serial number, and that's it. And that the kind of thought was, if you get calls reference a suspicious drone and the guy's gone, but the citizen can show you their phone that says, hey, it was FAA ABC 123, and then you'll have the ability to, with your app, or to reach back to the FAA and our LEAP special agents to get the information of who's the registered owner of FAA ABC 123.
The next one is not so much a question as it is a comment. It says, Mike, that is critical information about who can have access to the location of the controller. And it's important that this be explained better to the current drone community, because there seems to be a lot of concern about that. As it stands, people are under the impression that anyone is able to access full drone data through the system. So just a note there.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird, because if you think about this, the average citizen who's operating a drone has to typically operate within line of sight. So, their concern was, well, somebody will be able to see where I'm operating at. Well, it's like, well, if you're operating within line of sight, I should be able to see, even without an app, where you're at. So it really doesn't change the circumstances of that operation. But I understand, people get a little more nervous, because now technology takes you right to Charles, who's flying his drone, when in reality that, if you're flying line of sight, then you should be able to see that. The only difference would be if somebody who's like flying power lines that are, or whatever, that have a beyond visual line of sight, or 91.113 waiver, or 107.31, they'll obviously be away from the controller. But no, you guys can help us if you let private citizens know that only public safety will have the ability to see where with the remote ID, to see where the operator's at.
And there's one question here that says, what about nonprofit organizations? And I'm not sure what that's focused at, but I'm guessing all the rules are applicable the same.
It applies to everybody. We've had several, requests saying, well, can we opt out of this rule because we're whoever? And the answer is no. I mean, the rule only works if everybody complies.
Okay.
So AIRT is going to have to comply. Sorry, Chris.
And then there's a thing that says AMA fields are not included in the FRIAs.
So that's not true. An AMA can be part of the FRIA process, and usually already are. They're already covered under FAA right now. So the ability for them to move to the FRIA is going to be essentially very simple.
The next question is the FAA going to send us new cards so we don't need to carry around a sheet of paper, or send us a sticker for our cards? I'm not sure what that means. You have the card, and as long as you have a card.
I think they're saying whether or not they're able to exercise operating at night privileges, they won't have to have a waiver. So the issue is we'll be able to look you up. If you're operating at night, we show up and say, hey, let us see your registration, we'll be able to figure out whether or not you're operating at night. But I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work, so I'm going to ask that question.
So when law enforcement looks up the person's ID, they can see the various waivers not waivers, but this capabilities they have?
Yeah, they should. So, but I'm going to ask the question, how do you know if they have got night training? Good question.
Okay. Next one says, I assume the education to police will be through their certification updates, but can you confirm?
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
I assume the education to police will be through their certification updates, but can you confirm? I'm not sure which thing they're talking about there.
So just so we're clear, and maybe I should have said this, is your COA will remain your COA. And if you have operations under your COA, that's separate from Part 107. Under Part 1, however, they still have to comply with the remote ID rule. But under Part 107, that is not a public safety rule. That's a civil operations rule. So if you're flying under 107, you're really operating as a civil operator, even though your auspices may be the Acme Police or Fire Department. So you'll comply just like anybody else.
I guess one of the things that maybe they're getting at here is maybe outreach to some of the national organizations to communicate, which I know there's going to be some opportunities in the future to actually communicate this out to people, saying, here's some of the new things you need to understand about your operations that are relative to differentiating between COAs, Part 107s, et cetera.
No, and we appreciate any help you guys can give us in reaching out to people. We're as a federal agency, we're not very big, and most of the people involved in the FAA, there's only 48,000 employees, which sounds like a lot, but most of those people are in towers. So relatively a small organization, and a very small organization that's working with public safety. So any help you can give us with reaching out to the public or other public safety folks and letting them know what the rules are, or referring them back to us, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, the next question was really about the app, and it was just saying, will there be something out there? And yes, there will be apps that come out. They'll be developed by developers, by whomever. And I know Drone Responders is looking at trying to do that as well. And in such that the apps will probably be in the major stores, Google Play and iOS, etc.
Yep.
Let's see.
We anticipate that.
Is there language that will be adopted to counter the DOJ, DOI, FAA, and FCC document that stated possession of telemetry locating equipment was illegal?
So, and this is a question that we sort of had, but remote ID, the way it's developed, has been approved by Congress as an exception to that. So it's federal law. So it's sort of
so there's an exception.
There is an exception, and this is the exception.
Okay. Do you think the current aeroscope units to be able to receive the new remote ID data?
You're gonna have to ask DJI that.
Yeah, that's a proprietary question. Okay. Okay, that one's been answered. Let's see. Yep, that's been answered. What's the range for these remote ID units?
So when we did the remote ID demonstration, we didn't really do range testing, but we figured out a couple things. We found out that Bluetooth 4 gave us a range of probably about 1 to 2 kilometers. And you need to know that the bottom, the minimum requirement for remote. Sorry about that. People keep calling me on my iPad.
Trying to get special questions answered.
That's my daughter. It was my wife first, and then it was my daughter. But
okay.
The minimum requirement is if you can see it, you should be able to ID it. But so we weren't really interested in range as long as you could see the drone. But we did discover with Bluetooth 4, we're getting about 2 kilometers. Bluetooth 5, we're getting a significant anywhere from 3 to 5 kilometers. And we were told by DJI, who tested their Wi-Fi system, that they were getting out to 13 miles with their system. But we were only operating within about a mile.
Okay, this question says, all of my pilots have certificates that expire March 1st. Will the new online recertification testing be up to date and ready by then, or do I need to seek out a testing center?
Wow.
Be ready for either one. Take advantage of there, and if not, have another one ready to go.
I think, what Charles said.
Is the remote ID system open, or do you have to use an application from one of FAA's framework partners, Amazon, Map, T-Mobile, et cetera?
I know when we had the remote ID demonstration, we were told that you were there, Charles, that they would open the capability for anyone to develop specific apps for the remote ID, as long as it met but it had to be reviewed by the FAA, meet the FAA requirements.
Okay, this one has no Wi-Fi, but if we created a ground-based Wi-Fi receiver that looks for the RID info and send that info back to a central location to better aggregate and understand what's in the air in a region, is that prohibited in the rule?
It's not even covered in the rules. So if you receive the information via whatever the remote ID device you have, and you send it someplace else, that's up to you. I mean, in fact, we sort of envision, sort of the people that have jails, prisons, and critical infrastructure doing just that kind of thing.
Next question, will I need airworthiness certification for the M210s?
Yes, if you want to fly over people.
Next question, will airports ATC have access to remote ID information like police?
No.
Let's see, we have a night waiver for those that have Recurrent complete from this month. Will they have to retake the whole online Recurrent exam in order to fly at night, or is there an online portion just for night?
No, they'll take the entire course, but it's designed so that makes you current again. And I want to talk a little bit about that last question you asked about ATC. We've had several people ask us, say, hey, if I'm flying, if ATC has this information, then they'll know I'm out there and stuff. But you need to know right now, we have, I don't know how many millions of drones that are actually registered now. Our ATC is designed for manned aircraft, and their scopes are designed for manned aircraft. And most of the radar systems we use are designed for, projecting flights coming in to a runway, not for really low level operations. So it's never going to be, we sort of anticipate that someday in the future, as remote ID sort of merges into UTM, unmanned traffic management, or UAS traffic management, that someday air traffic controller may have the ability to know when a drone's there based on sort of the Internet of Things. But right now the answer is no.
Will the terminology be changed under Part 91 to adopt these requirements, or will that stay the same, or will we have to submit information in the application?
I'm not sure what they're asking. Part 91 is they're talking about their COA. If they're talking about their COA, then that's a different issue altogether. It's not a civil operation under Part 107. The only thing they'll be required to do differently is comply with remote ID.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Can you please send the energy charts offered to Dave Hook?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, just email me and I'll send them to you. I don't know if my email's up there, but it's Michael, MICHAEL .O'Shea, OSHEA at FAA.gov.
And if you send it to me, I will put it out as well to others. With the updates to the night operations rule, will Lance be available for night operations since no waiver is required, and the only waiver would be to...
Wow, what a great question. So I think we've had this discussion. Charles and I may have had it already, but so everybody was sort of under the impression that once we did remote ID and everybody automatically got night operations with the new rule, then people would just be able to opt to go into Lance and operate at night. And we sort of assumed that it was just a matter of flipping a switch and then it would allow night operations. But we were told that is not the case. And so we're looking at, it's a good thing that there's a couple of months before the rule goes into implementation, because there's some work that has to be done to allow night operations under Lance. But that is ongoing right now.
I would take it that there would need to be connectivity between databases to be able to see who has that night recurrence, their night training, whatever.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. I can't talk to it because they haven't developed what it's going to look like. But the assumption was that at some point everybody who will have night by taking the recurrent testing. So there's really no reason to check a different database. But because some people will still start off operating with their current waiver they have, and some people will not operate with the if you just renewed your license and you got 2 years and you don't have a night waiver, how do we confirm in Lance when you request operations after twilight that you're operating legally? And I think it's probably just a matter of verbiage that comes up when you make the request. It says, are you making sure that you are exercising the privileges that you actually have.
Okay, are the rules for flying over people and night for both Part 107 pilots and hobbyists?
So I can't talk a lot to the hobbyists because that's not my knowledge base. And I keep telling my buddy who works on hobby stuff, I would love to get a brief on what they're doing. They're coming up with their own testing process for them, which is called Trust. And it's an acronym for something, and I don't know what it is. we're the federal government. We're famous for acronyms. But I don't know how they will have to comply with remote ID unless they're operating in a FRIA. And I don't know whether that's going to include, their training will include night operations or not. I don't know.
Okay, let's see.
But right now they can operate at night without a waiver.
Yep.
For recreational purposes.
Okay. Okay, can you re-clarify the FAA online training info? When will this, like, it's already been covered. I'm not gonna do it again. I've got a lot of questions here, so I'm gonna keep moving. It states that the FAA will be providing education to authorities of these rules. Who is conducting that training?
So are you talking about the online training? If you're talking about the online training, that'll be done by the FAA.
Okay, that's been answered. How will the FAA keep the integrity of the test if you're taking it online?
I don't know.
It's the honor system, right?
It's a good question, actually. We're going to have biometrics built into it and electric shock. And no, I'm just kidding. I have no idea how they're going to do that, but I'm going to write that down.
If we operate under a COA for night operations and over people, do we continue to write that in the COA, or is there any need to? I think the answer is yes. Or so it actually comes with the COA, right?
Yeah, COA is separate from this. Remember, COAs are for public aircraft operations, and that means it's for government, whereas Part 107 is for civil operators, non-government. However, government can operate under Part 107. So I always think when you're operating on 107, you're really not the Acme Police Department or Fire Department or Emergency Management Agency. You're really Joe Q. Public, who just happens to work for the Acme Police Department, Fire Department, Emergency Management Agency.
Okay, we have a 107 night waiver for our county. Are we able to get one under the new rule, or is it only for individual persons now?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer. I think because we're moving everybody to do this online 107 recurrency testing, and even the 107 initial testing will include night operations in it, that will probably go away, but I don't know the answer to that for sure.
I mean, it sounds like you'll want people to go through that training, and that's the recurrency process going forward. So you'd want everybody to have that training and know that they've done it. This is what my guess would be.
I think you're probably right. But I wrote that down.
For flight over people, it seems new language specifies to mean over assemblies of people and sustained flight, but does not address what is an assembly and sustained, and is not prohibited if the flight does not meet either definition. So
that's one of those things that has yet to be determined, I guess, by our general counsel. But I don't know the definition of that either. And some people have asked, but I've been told they're working on what they exactly mean or how they're going to define that. What is?
Okay, this one says. Not
and then you asked that question to us earlier too, didn't you, Charles?
Yeah.
So I think that's why we sent it over to our general counsel.
Not specifically related to new rulings for public safety organizations, will there be any way to dynamically manage small terminal-sized airspace delegation mechanisms, request and/or distribution to airmen for public safety? Something akin to TFR is the example they were thinking
of. I'm not really I don't know how to answer that question, but it sounds like they're sort of talking about UTM, which is sort of coming in the future. But we're not going to do sort of individual TFRs for public safety operations. We're, because there's a federal guidelines for what meets what can cause a TFR to be issued. And typically, one-off operations don't usually cause that. Usually it's sustained operations, wildfires that are going on for several days, that kind of stuff.
Okay, you guys got to stop asking questions because I'm never going to get done here. Let's see. In reference to the current topic on online testing and content review, they are wondering, would the FAA put the testing out in their typical format, which has review followed by an online nearly open book test? Or do you know?
I don't know. Like I said, I haven't seen the test, so I don't know.
So stand by. What's the range?
You will probably see the test before I do.
Yeah, when do you expect? Okay, we did that. Okay, got that. Has the FAA reconsidered allowing public safety agency to obtain Part 107 airspace waivers again under the rules of 107, not COA, now that night flight will be allowed? 107 allows for a wider range of mission sets versus the COA. I think you kind of said that earlier.
So you can definitely fly under 107 and request the specific waivers to 107 that are allowed. As a public safety agency, you don't have to fly under a COA as a public safety agency. You can, but remember, you're using a civil rule to operate under. And people get mad. They go, "Why don't you do something specifically for us under 107?" And it's because 107 is not specifically for public safety. It's for civil operations. So if we did it for you, we'd have to do it for everybody.
Okay, this one says, I understand the SOSC SGI is an option, but there are those agencies whose entire area fall within controlled airspace, and this would require a call to the SOSC every time they fly.
So I don't know what specific area you're talking about. I think we're up to 81% of all airports are now Lance equipped. So you can use Lance operations. If you're talking about operating at night, where Lance is not currently available, for a non-emergency operation, and that we do have that issue under a COA, you can, and also under Part 107, you can apply for an airspace authorization to conduct operations. It's usually to be conducted below the facility map altitude values. And then if you need further from that, then you can certainly apply for it if you can make the justification for it.
And it says the question wasn't answered. Will fire agencies have access to the same feature as police?
They should. I mean, it really depends, the way they're going to determine who gets this system. I mean, if you can make the case for it because, you're a wildlife firefighting agency and you're concerned about drones coming into your operation, so that would prevent you from dropping, fire retardant or, whatever. If you have justification for it, you should be able to get it. And of course, and most larger fire agencies actually have people who are dual commissioned.
So fire marshals, et cetera,
yep.
Kind of thing. Okay. Does the new night ops rule require a visual observer?
I don't think so, because I don't think 107 requires the night operator to have a visual observer.
Okay, you got that. What about the FAA inspectors? Can they have full remote ID?
Yes.
The card has an expiration date on it. New cards in the future? I don't think that date is really necessarily relevant.
What card has an expiration date on it?
I think it doesn't say like expires in 2 years or something. I can't remember what my card says.
Nope.
Okay. Will the FAST team, drone pros, be involved in the outreach and training plans for the new rules? I'm guessing anybody can be involved.
We hope that the FAST team, drone pros, will be involved. They're sort of our, ambassadors for, the FAA. So we're hoping we can get them involved in working with this.
We currently have a flight over people waiver using a parachute system. Will parachutes be taken into consideration when determining foot-pounds for impact calculation?
I don't know. And I heard somebody else that question, but I don't know. But I'm writing that down.
And local law enforcement isn't able to do anything about illegal drone flying, nor do we want to, but is there language or is there going to be anything that expands our authority? And I would say that would not be coming from the FAA.
Yeah, I probably should just leave it at that, but, I'll leave it at that.
Yep. What is the difference between an FAA inspector and a police, sheriff, fire in regards with what they can ask, like only FAA can ask about drone and paperwork? And now that I think you've kind of said, now in the rule, it says that they have to be able to provide this information to law enforcement. Pretty
much every time we write the rule, it says to FAA or to and law enforcement personnel. And if you look at your COA or your waivers or whatever, it'll typically say that.
And then they ask, can you explain the session RID info so one cannot determine who is operating based on the serial number?
So the session ID is you remember the RSA things we used to have, would generate numbers before you could log on your computer or get into your bank account or whatever. It's essentially that sort of a process that allow you to do a randomly generated number that links back to our system that lets us know that if we see, ABC123, that's Mike O'Shea and his DJI Spark. But every time you go up, it'll change, but we'll still know that that randomly generated number belongs to the Acme Police Department. We will, not the general public.
Yeah, there's a question here that says, can you go into some detail about SGI? And the answer is no. We'll have
Can you, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Can you go into more detail about SGI? And we don't have time for that. That's another session that we're going to go into that. Hopefully the next session, maybe. Are there any changes to Part 107 that will prohibit the use of home-built drones to be used commercial purposes? I think they
No, as long as you meet the requirements.
Yeah.
So as long as you either have a broadcast module or you have a standard ID, and then all the other stuff involved, you can still do it.
The question is 4G or 5G going to be an option for RID? I would say currently the answer is no, because it's based on Wi-Fi.
Not required.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so then the question says, okay, you're not going to have it at ATC as far as remote ID identification. What about the counter UAS market?
If I was in the counter UAS market, I would definitely use remote ID as part of that.
And I think they're probably wondering, can they get access to the more information? The location of the controller.
That really depends on who owns the system.
Yeah, if it's a law enforcement agency, counter UAS, then they obviously can. But right now,
it's DOJ, Bureau of Prisons, they're probably going to have the ability. If it's Acme Manufacturing wants to know about drones flying toward them, they're probably not.
Okay. One thing somebody points out is a visual observer at night is a requirement under the COA, just for your information.
COA, not 107. This is 107. Remember? I saw that, Katie.
Okay, so that's all that. Now I got to go here to the questions, which I have. Okay, we've got that. That's done. It says, how long will that information be available as far as the remote ID broadcast? And that depends on the app that you're using, I would say, because the broadcast is immediate now and then it's over. What company will making the broadcast device? We don't know. Will there be a program to be located, identify drones using our phones? Yes, that's already been answered. Okay, that's been answered. That's been answered. That's been answered. Okay, we're getting most of these that have been answered. The new rule states that UAs flying over people must contain no exposed rotating parts that would lacerate human skin. Propeller guards, shrouds would be an option to meet the requirement, but would a propeller kill switch that stops the rotation of the propeller be sufficient to meet the new requirement? How would you know when it's going to kill the...
The answer to that is
if you have a manual
don't know.
kill switch. Yeah, I don't think that's going to work.
And just to let you know, I did get an email from my colleague, John Meehan, who wanted to remind you that the Recurrent course is a course, not an exam. We have to be careful we don't call it that. They have to get a go in all areas to successfully complete the course. It's not a test. He said, I think public will be able to see the location. And I put something like that doesn't make sense.
Okay. Under the Part 107 rules, the drone operator did not need to have a Part 107 certificate as long as the RPIC did and could immediately take over controls. Does the new rule require the operator to have Part 107 certificate?
If that rule is not changing.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
And one thing that John pointed out that was, you were asking about how do people let them know that they complete the night operation course, is you'll get a printout, and then you'll have to show that'll give you the proof to show that you completed the course.
Okay. Okay. That is all of the questions. So, wow, that was pretty good though, but I had some good questions on there that we still have yet to be answered. And if you can send me those, we'll send something out to everybody.
Yeah, there's some really good questions you guys asked that I don't know the answer to, but I don't know how they're going to take account in the parachute. I know that they've used that for other operations, and it a lot depends on what altitude you're flying at. If you know that the parachute takes 30 feet to deploy, then you're obviously going to have to fly higher than 30 feet at all times, in order to fly over people. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of stuff built into that rule. And I know that ASTM, who worked on the parachute standard, is also helping us work on the how people can be compliant with ops over people. So I'm sure they're going to take that into consideration, but I just don't know. But I want to know. It's kind of interesting.
So as we wrap up this session, just want to let you know that we'll be doing this again the second Wednesday of every month at 4 p.m. This will be a public safety conversation on UAS, and it'll be with Mike O'Shea and either himself or someone else from the FAA from different areas and that we'll be talking about. And again, I'd urge you to go to droneresponders.org if you're not already a member and join. Membership is free. And I think that's a wrap.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Chris.